US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin are set to meet in coming days as the US ramps up pressure on Putin to end Russia's war in Ukraine.
Authorities in the UK detained first migrants under the plan to thwart boats crossing through the English Channel from France.
In a major win for environmental activists, France's Constitutional Council struck down a controversial article of an agricultural law.
US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin are preparing to meet, a Kremlin aide said Thursday, confirming previous reports. A meeting could take place as soon as next week. The announcement comes after Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff visited Moscow, and one day before a deadline imposed by Trump for Putin to agree to a ceasefire deal is set to expire. Neither side confirmed what Witkoff's visit to Moscow entailed, with Trump refusing to call the meeting a breakthrough. Trump has previously expressed frustration with the Russian leader's inability to agree to even a temporary pause in fighting, with Russia continuing to strike Ukrainian towns and cities despite US efforts to seal a truce. Trump hinted at plans to hold a three-way meeting between himself, Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, a proposal the Kremlin played down. Moscow left the option of that meeting without comment, the Kremlin said Thursday. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that Russia was more inclined to agree to a truce following Witkoff's visit. He cautioned that it is important that Russia does not deceive Ukraine or the United States in the details of a potential ceasefire agreement. Russian strikes have killed at least 6 people and injured 35 others across Ukraine in the past day, just one day before US President Donald Trump's deadline for Moscow to agree to a ceasefire deal. The attacks killed 4 civilians in the Zaporizhzhia region, its governor said, where Moscow launched a total of 723 strikes on at least 12 areas in the past day. Another 2 civilians were killed in the wider Donetsk area, with additional injuries in Sumy, Kharkiv, and Kherson. The strikes come just one day before a deadline imposed by Trump for Russia to halt fighting on Ukraine or face a wave of sweeping additional tariffs. On Wednesday, Trump appeared to implement his threats by hitting India with an additional 25% tariff over its purchases of Russian oil. The US leader has said he will up the economic pressure on Russia should it continue to strike Ukraine past the ceasefire deadline date.
The US began officially levying higher taxes on imports from dozens of countries on Thursday, 4 months after President Donald Trump first announced plans to impose tariffs on most of the world. The White House said that starting just after midnight, goods from more than 60 countries would face tariff rates of 10% or higher. Products from the European Union, Japan, and South Korea will be taxed at 15%, while imports from Taiwan, Vietnam, and Bangladesh will be taxed at 20%. While seeking new trade agreements across the board, the Trump administration says it expects places such as the EU, Japan, and South Korea to invest hundreds of billions of dollars in the US. Trump's trade policies are aimed at reshaping the structure of global trade, which he believes is unfair towards the US. Despite the controversy, the US has remained confident that the onset of its broad tariffs will provide clarity about the path of the world's largest economy. In late July, the EU and US tentatively agreed on a 15% tariff for the vast majority of EU products. The deal is, however, preliminary and its details are yet to be fleshed out.
US President Donald Trump has hit India with an extra 25% tariff over its Russian oil deals, bringing total US tariffs on the country to a steep 50%. India has not supported Ukraine-related sanctions by the US and its allies on Moscow by continuing to acquire oil from Russia. The tariffs are set to take effect 21 days after the order is signed. The move is ostensibly aimed at cutting the Kremlin off from revenue to fund its ongoing war in Ukraine and pushing Moscow towards the negotiating table. Israel's Security Cabinet is set to debate expanding its Gaza offensive. a move facing pushback from within the country's political and military ranks. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been meeting senior advisors and security officials this week to discuss, in his office's words, ways to further achieve Israel's goals in Gaza. These talks follow last month's collapse of ceasefire negotiations between Israel and Hamas. An Israeli official said the cabinet is likely to approve a broader military plan targeting areas of Gaza not yet under Israeli control. Crucially, there has been opposition from within the IDF. The IDF's Chief of General Staff, Eyal Zamir, warned that the plan would endanger the lives of hostages still in Hamas's captivity, while further stretching Israel's military. Israeli protesters gathered outside the meeting to rally against the proposed move, which they also say risks the lives of hostages. It could also spark renewed international condemnation as Gaza grapples with widespread famine and surging civilian casualties.
A Brussels court has not only prohibited the Flemish government from sending a container of military equipment from the port of Antwerp to Israel, but halted any future transit of military gear. It's a victory for 4 NGOs that accuse Flanders of failing to meet its obligations under international law over the transfer of military equipment through the port of Antwerp.
The containers contained pallets that included pallets of tapered roller bearings, which are something that's used in tanks and in armored vehicles. They're being shipped specifically to a company called Ashdod Ashkelon in Ashdod in Israel, which is an exclusive supplier to the Israeli army of the Merkava tanks, which are being used in Gaza in the genocide now.
Belgium has banned arms exports to Israel since 2009. However, the hearing revealed that the Flemish government only controls arms exports when transport companies request them. The Genocide Convention, the Geneva Conventions and the Arms Trade Treaty prohibits countries from exporting military equipment that could be used to commit war crimes or genocide. The judge concluded that the region of Flanders was systematically failing to meet its obligations.
The judge referred to the Geneva Convention, the judge referred to the Arms Trade Treaty, the judge referred to the current weapons decree that's in force in Flanders as well. So there's a very broad basis for this case, and it was upheld on all accounts, including preventing the specific container, but also all further shipments of military materials to Israel that could be used potentially in genocide.
When contacted by Euronews, the Flemish government, which still has the right to appeal the decision, did not respond. The casket carrying the body of Romania's first elected president after the fall of communism in 1989 was transferred from the hospital to the presidential palace for a state funeral on Wednesday.
Romania's first president after revolution, Ion Iliescu, was laid to rest in Bucharest. He passed away at the age of 95. During his presidency, the country joined NATO, laid the groundwork for EU accession, and adopted a new national constitution. More than 1,000 people attended at the ceremony to pay their final respects, and the day of August 7 was declared a day of national mourning in Romania. However, the legacy of Ion Iliescu remains a controversial one. He was accused of crimes against humanity after thousands of Romanians lost their lives during the Romanian Revolution and the violent protests that took place at the beginning of the 90s. Many questions will remain unanswered because after his death, Ion Iliescu no longer could stand trial.
British border authorities have detained the first group of migrants under a pilot plan that will send some who crossed the English Channel on small boats back to France. According to the UK Home Office, the migrants were detained on Wednesday, the day the program came into force, and will be held at immigration removal centres until they are returned to France.
The groundbreaking principle here is that people can be returned to France if they arrive on these dangerous and illegal small boats. In return, we will take people who have applied legally through a legal process, been through security checks, but we should be returning people who have made these illegal crossings.
UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and French President Emmanuel Macron announced a deal last month. While the pilot involves a limited number of people, UK officials suggest the deal is a breakthrough because it sets a precedent. However, critics say the program will do little to deter migrants because the numbers returned to France are small and loopholes will allow people who enter Britain illegally to remain as they pursue human rights claims.
It's a major win for environmental activists. France's Constitutional Council, where I'm currently standing, struck down one of the most controversial articles of the Duplon agricultural law, blocking the return of a pesticide widely known as the bee killer. In a decision handed down on Thursday evening, the council ruled that allowing exemptions to use the pesticide like acetamiprid, for example, would violate France's Charter of the Environment, including the right to live in healthy surroundings. Acetamiprid was already banned in France back in 2018, but it is still legal in certain EU countries. Its comeback has been widely requested by certain beet and hazelnut farmers, citing crop risks. But public backlash has been absolutely overwhelming these past few weeks. A petition to repeal the law drew a record 2.1 million signatures. And while much of this agricultural Duplon law still stands, Thursday's ruling draws a clear divide between the French public and the country's lawmakers.